People always said my brother had a mind for business. Even before he could spell the word, Dad was already calling him the future CEO. At the breakfast table, when we were kids, my brother would talk about how he'd sell lemonade or fix bikes for the neighbors. Dad would beam with pride. "Now that's initiative," Dad would say. "You've got a sharp head on your shoulders, Mason." Meanwhile, I was on the other side of the table, drawing pictures in the condensation on my glass or writing short poems on napkins. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't even shy. I just wasn't loud. Mom would smile at me and say things like, "Our little artist," or "She's got such a kind heart." But kind hearts don't run companies. At least not in Dad's eyes. I remember being 12 and trying to help Mason build a little wooden stand for his lemonade operation. I offered to paint the sign. Something colorful, inviting. I stayed up all night drawing the letters in bubble style, decorating the border with lemons and smiley faces. When Dad saw it the next morning, he chuckled and said, "Cute, but let your brother handle the business stuff, sweetheart." That was the first time I felt it. The distance. The unspoken decision that Mason would carry the legacy, and I would stand off to the side, clapping quietly while he succeeded. At school, I got good grades. I was in honors classes. I even won a district-wide writing competition. Dad said, "That's nice," and hung the certificate on the fridge for about a week. But when Mason got a junior internship at a local accounting firm over the summer, there were steak dinners and handshakes all around. "Just like his old man," Dad had said, raising a glass. No one raised a glass for my short story being published in the county newsletter. When Dad got sick, there wasn't much time to talk about legacy. It happened fast. A bad cough that turned into something more. Hospitals. Doctors. Weeks of silence in sterile rooms filled with machines that beeped like broken clocks. I visited every day. Mason came too, but mostly for updates. When the time came to discuss the will, I didn't expect much. Still, there was a small, childish part of me that thought maybe Dad had noticed. That he'd seen the way I'd been quietly supporting the family, helping Mom with appointments, managing the estate paperwork, showing up when no one else did. But no. The business, the company he built from the ground up, the pride of his life, went to Mason. No conversation, no hesitation, just a line in a document and a nod from the lawyer. I remember the cold press of the leather chair in that office, the way Mason shook hands like it was a deal-closing ceremony, the way my name was barely mentioned, not even a, "What about her?" I didn't even ask why. I already knew the answer. Later that night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and the original copy of Dad's business license, something I'd kept all these years, tucked between books on a shelf. Not because I wanted to run the company, not then, but because I thought it was part of our story. Turns out it never had been. A few weeks later, at the funeral, people came up to Mason like he was royalty. "You'll do great things," they said. "He'd be proud." No one asked what I'd do next. Aunt Marlene tried to console me. "He left the company to Mason because that's what made sense," she said. "But you were always his emotional anchor." His emotional anchor. That was just a polite way of saying, "You're not the one who makes money." Afterward, I walked the halls of the office building my father once walked. Mason had already moved into his office. New chair. His nameplate on the door. I stood there for a second, just outside. He looked up, saw me, and smiled in that confident, effortless way he always had. "Hey, kiddo," Mason said. "Thanks for coming." I wasn't a kid anymore. I was 27. I just wanted to say, "I'm here if you ever need help," I told him. He leaned back and nodded. "Thanks, but I think I've got it handled." That was the last time I offered. He stopped noticing, and I started planning. The first few weeks after Dad passed, I kept showing up, to the office, to family dinners, to the little cracks in our lives where I thought I still belonged. I told myself that even if I wasn't named in the will, even if I hadn't inherited the title or the corner office, I could still be useful. "Hey," I said to Mason one morning over coffee at Mom's. "I've been thinking I could help out at the company. Maybe with design, social media. You know I did freelance work for that nonprofit last year." Mason barely looked up from his phone. "That's sweet of you," Mason said. "But I've got it covered. We just hired someone for all that." "Oh," I said. "I didn't realize." "Yeah," Mason replied, glancing at his watch. "Big picture stuff is taking up most of my time, but we've got a team now. You wouldn't believe how much onboarding there is." He patted me on the arm like I was 12 and wandered off to take a call. It wasn't just that he said no. It was how quickly he dismissed the idea, like I was offering to bring cupcakes to a board meeting instead of real contributions. A week later, I sent him an email. Just a short note with a few marketing ideas I'd drafted during one of my lunch breaks. A rebrand concept, better online presence, a loyalty program. I never got a reply. At the next Sunday dinner, I tried again. "You know, I was thinking, what if the company offered workshops?" I said, glancing at Mason. "Workshops?" he asked in that familiar tone, the one that sounded like a smirk wrapped in curiosity. "For small businesses," I said. "It could raise your profile, position you as a thought leader. It's low cost and you could probably write most of it off as community engagement." "Wow," Mason interrupted. "You've really been thinking about this stuff, huh?" He said it loud enough for the table to hear. Loud enough that Aunt Marlene giggled and muttered, "She's got ideas." I didn't even finish my sentence. The conversation moved on to his new executive assistant. "Harvard grad, brilliant, expensive," Mason said, and how he was planning to expand into the commercial market. I sat there, chewing my food, my appetite gone. That night, I told myself I'd stop offering ideas, not out of spite, but because there's a difference between being helpful and begging to be included. And he never once asked why I stopped. Mom noticed, of course. Moms always do. She pulled me aside after dinner and said, "You don't have to prove yourself, sweetheart." "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said. I want to be part of something that matters." She nodded slowly, but her eyes were sad. She wasn't going to challenge Mason. That wasn't how this family worked. At one point, I considered showing up at the office anyway, just to visit. But then I remembered Mason's face when I last mentioned helping. I remembered the way he looked past me, not at me, and I stayed home. Over the next few months, the business became his world. Our father's name was still on the letterhead, but Mason had changed everything else. New logo, new desks, new uniforms. Even the mission statement on the website had shifted from family-owned since 1989 to driven by vision, built for the future. Family, nowhere in sight. Even the staff photo they posted online didn't include me. Not that it should have. I didn't work there. But still, it stung. I wasn't part of the meetings, or the milestones, or the photos. At dinners, Mason talked about KPIs and revenue models like he was auditioning for Shark Tank. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one at the end of the table. The one people asked about second, out of politeness. "So how's what is it again? Design work?" "It's fine," I said. "Freelance mostly. A bit of project management now." "That's nice," they'd say. The way people say, "That's nice," when they don't really mean it. Sometimes Mason would jump in with a half laugh. "She's the creative one, remember?" And everyone would chuckle, as if creativity was a personality quirk and not an actual skill. I started skipping dinners after a while. Told myself I was busy. Told Mom I had work or deadlines or a sore throat. But really, I just couldn't keep showing up to a table where no one noticed when I left. That December, they had a holiday party at the office. A big one. Photos all over social media. Everyone in red and gold, champagne flutes in hand, Mason front and center like a king. I wasn't invited, not even as a guest. That night, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and stared at my own laptop screen. The tabs open: investment research, online MBA options, business strategy PDFs. I'd been reading them for months in silence. Because while Mason was curating an image, I was quietly laying groundwork. I just didn't know yet how far it would take me. All I knew was I had finally stopped offering. And Mason? He never noticed. The day I stopped offering was also the day I started building. Not in a grand, dramatic way. There was no sudden reinvention, no movie montage of reinvention. Just quiet decisions, steady ones. A job here, a course there. Brick by brick. I took a position as a junior analyst at a mid-sized logistics company. Nothing glamorous, no big salary, just spreadsheets, invoices, and late-night audits. But I learned. Quickly. At night, I enrolled in community finance courses. At first, it was out of boredom, then obsession. Something about watching numbers shape stories lit up a part of me I hadn't known was hungry. Real estate is leverage, said one instructor. Not just property, power. That stuck with me. I started reading everything I could on ownership, what it meant, who held it, and how to get it. Business structure, asset control, brand valuation. I learned how the scaffolding behind a company was often more important than the storefront itself. Meanwhile, Mason's company was all storefront. He was all smiles at family events. "We just opened our third location," he'd say, holding up a glass. "5-year plan is global now." I clapped politely, asked no questions. But when I got home, I pulled up public records, business registrations, tax liens, expansion leases, debt ratios. I studied Mason's company the way you study a blueprint before the storm. I wasn't hoping he'd fail, but I knew he might, because confidence doesn't balance books, and charisma doesn't equal cash flow. I didn't build in response to him. I built in response to being left out. I saved every extra dollar, cut back on takeout, lived in a tiny apartment above a noisy deli. I drove an old hatchback that coughed every time I turned the key. And I invested. The first thing I bought was a parking space, just a single deeded space in a crowded downtown garage. Then I rented it out. It seemed silly to some. "You bought what?" asked my friend Maya over coffee. "A parking space," I replied. She blinked. "Okay, and what are you going to do with it?" "Make money," I said. A year later, I bought a second one. Then a tiny one-bedroom that needed a new roof and 1,000 hours of elbow grease. I flipped it. Not for a fortune, but for a start. With every deal, I learned. And every time Mason posted about a ribbon cutting or new hire, I felt that old sting in my chest, but it faded faster each time. By then, I'd stopped attending most family dinners altogether. I didn't need another evening of being overlooked in favor of our resident CEO. I had other things to focus on, like the LLC I registered under a quiet professional name, like the investment partners I met through local business groups, like the commercial property I bought at auction, a failing strip mall no one wanted, but I saw potential in. Failure came too. One project nearly bankrupted me. I trusted the wrong contractor, took on too much debt, spent 3 months eating canned soup and staring at a bank balance that danced too close to zero. But I didn't stop. I cut my losses, regrouped, rebuilt. Eventually, I hired my first employee, then another, and then I realized something strange. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to Mason, not to my family, not even to myself. I just liked building. The work was messy and slow and often thankless. But it was mine, and it was real. I checked on Mason's company from time to time, never publicly, never with judgment, just quiet curiosity, watching. They grew, and then stalled. He expanded too quickly, took on high-interest loans, bought buildings before securing tenants. I noticed the cracks long before the rest of the family did. At one point, Mason posted a photo of a new store opening. Big smiles, ribbon, confetti. But I'd already read the financial statement that showed their net income had shrunk 3 quarters in a row. He had the spotlight, but I had the spreadsheet. And one day, while reviewing potential acquisitions with my small but mighty team, I paused. "Wait," I said, scrolling back up. "This name, is that what I think it is?" They nodded. "It's under a holding company now. The brand's strong, but the financials are rough. Might be an opportunity." I leaned back in my chair. The name on the form was different, but I knew exactly what it was. I stared at it for a long time. Not with glee, not even with shock, just a quiet hum of inevitability. Because while Mason had inherited the company, I'd built the foundation it now sat on. I was in the middle of a quarterly review when one of my analysts flagged a listing in our acquisition system. "We've got a quiet one," said Myra, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "Asset-heavy, commercial licenses. Looks like mismanaged debt, not poor product." I skimmed the file. "Name?" She named it. And I froze. Not a dramatic fall-out-of-your-chair freeze. Just stillness. The kind where the air around you seems to hush. Like even the room knew something had shifted. It wasn't the name of Mason's business exactly. It was the name of the holding company. The one Dad had established years ago. The legal umbrella under which the storefronts, intellectual property, and leases sat. I knew that name. I'd seen it on legal paperwork during estate proceedings. I'd seen it at the footer of invoices, stamped across property deeds. And now, it was up for sale. I scrolled through the details. Mason had overextended himself. Aggressive expansion, poor debt structuring, some bad hires. The storefronts were still running, but behind the scenes, everything was sagging. And this listing? It wasn't public. Not yet. But it had been quietly offered to a few investors in my network, likely in hopes of salvaging the company without a PR disaster. I sat back in my chair and let the irony settle. He didn't just inherit Dad's business. He wrapped it in paper he didn't understand. And now I was staring at the fine print. "Myra," I said, steadying my voice, "I want a full breakdown. Assets, liabilities, lien status, everything." "You think it's worth the trouble?" Myra asked. I think," I said, "this might be personal." She raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" Number, but he should be. Over the next 2 weeks, I ran numbers, had my legal team run even more. I didn't want the storefronts. I didn't want his staff or his brand name. I wanted the structure, the bones, the real power. The holding company owned the properties, the branding, the trademarks, the digital assets, the back-end systems. It owned everything Mason thought he did, just indirectly. And now it was mine for the taking. The negotiation was swift. The seller was discreet, and within a month, the deal was closed. Just like that. No press release, no public filing with my name on it. Just a clean transaction through one of my shell firms. The holding company was mine. And with it, every asset Mason had ever boasted about. I didn't need his approval. Didn't ask for his signature. He didn't even know it had changed hands. Yet. I remember standing outside one of the properties a few days later. One of his new flagship locations. Polished signage, sleek interior. A chalkboard out front boasting a weekend special. I watched for a moment, arms folded. Then I smiled. Because I wasn't there to shop. I was there to check on my investment. He still held the title of CEO, but I held the keys. The lease was under my company now. The logo he proudly wore on his polo shirt? My intellectual property. The software his managers used to schedule staff? Mine. And all he had to do to keep it? Pay me, rent, licensing, usage fees every month. I didn't gloat. I didn't make calls or send veiled threats. That wasn't my style, but I made sure the new lease agreement came across his desk. Same logo, new watermark, my watermark. I imagined his face when he read the fine print, The moment he realized he was no longer the landlord, just the tenant, and I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel vindication. I felt calm, because I hadn't stolen anything. I'd bought what was available, what he'd neglected, what he'd assumed would always be his. He inherited the name. I acquired the legacy, and that made all the difference. At night, I'd sit with a glass of wine, reviewing statements, watching rent payments land, watching the restructuring process unfold. The silent kind of power, not the showy kind Mason always loved. There were still meetings to attend, legalities to work out. I kept everything clean, professional, precise. I never rubbed it in. But I didn't hide it either, because power doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it comes in a PDF, a signed contract, a bank wire confirmation. I thought back to the day Dad signed the business over to Mason. He never looked at me during the reading of the will, never said, "This has nothing to do with love," never acknowledged what he was taking from me, or what he believed I lacked. And now I owned everything Dad built, not because I was chosen, but because I chose myself. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was reviewing a new property proposal when my assistant, Camille, knocked on the door. "Your brother's on the line," Camille said. "He asked for 10 minutes of your time." I looked up slowly. Did he sound aware? Camille hesitated. He sounded unsettled, but polite. I nodded. Put him through. The line clicked. For a moment, there was silence. Then, "Hey," Mason said. "Can we meet?" I leaned back in my chair. "Meet? Yeah, I think we should talk. You free Friday? My office?" There it was. I almost smiled. Not because he'd asked politely, but because I knew exactly where that office was. And because, for the first time in our lives, he wasn't calling as the older brother. He was calling as a man who'd just learned the walls around him didn't belong to him anymore. "Yes," I said. "Friday's fine." When I walked into the building 2 days later, the receptionist, Tamika, her name tag read, smiled at me. Not the way people smile at tenants, the way they smile at owners. "Good afternoon," Tamika said. "Mr. Mason's expecting you. Elevator to the left." I nodded. "Thank you, Tamika." She blinked. "You know my name?" "I try to know the names of people in my buildings," I said, and stepped into the elevator. I took a breath as the doors closed. Not from nerves, but from the gravity of it all. That elevator ride felt like something symbolic. Not a rise, exactly. More like a shift. The kind that takes years. Quiet, almost invisible. Until it lands right here on the 12th floor, outside an office that used to be mine in every way except legally. Now, it was mine. The door to Mason's office was open. He stood when I entered, in a pressed shirt, jaw tight, a folder on his desk, his posture uncertain. "Hey," Mason said, gesturing toward a chair. "Thanks for coming." I sat, crossed my legs, smoothed my skirt. "Of course," I said. He studied me. "So, you really bought the holding company?" I nodded. "Through Fairline Partners? Yes." He blew out a breath. "Why?" "That's business," I said simply. "It was available. It made sense. I bought it." His mouth twitched. "You didn't think to tell me?" "You didn't think to invite me into the business in the first place," I said gently. "This isn't retaliation, Mason. It's opportunity." He leaned back. "You own the building?" I nodded again. "And the leases?" "Yes." He rubbed his face. "And the trademarks?" "All of them, including the name, the website, the inventory systems, even the newsletter template, I believe." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "So, I'm your tenant." I tilted my head. "Technically, yes. But I'm not here to throw that in your face." He looked down at the folder. "This isn't what I expected." "No," I agreed. "It rarely is." He looked up, expression softer now. "You're calm about this." I've had time to prepare, I said. And I didn't do this to gloat. I didn't come here for an apology either. I came to make sure you understood the terms of your new lease. He laughed, just once, bitterly. You sound like Dad. I paused. No, Mason. I sound like me. For the first time, maybe. That silenced him. He ran a hand through his hair, then pushed the folder toward me. I've reviewed the new agreement. My legal team's going over it, but it's fair. Surprisingly so. I told my lawyers to keep everything clean, I said. No surprise clauses. No jabs, just business. He swallowed hard. So you're really not here to take it all away? I shook my head. I don't want to run your business, Mason. I just want what's mine. Which is the foundation, I said. The ground under your feet, and the chance to finally be seen, not as the sweet one or the quiet one, but as someone who understands value, who built value. He looked genuinely shaken now, not angry, just confronted, with the years, the assumptions, the unspoken hierarchy. You were always good with words, he said quietly. I was always good with strategy, I corrected. He nodded slowly. I see that now. Silence stretched between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, just full, like a room that had finally been aired out. I stood. He rose with me. Well, I said, lifting the lease agreement, you know where to send the rent. His lips curled, not in mockery, but something closer to respect. I'll make sure it's on time, he said. I walked to the door, paused, then looked back. You may still be CEO, Mason, but don't forget, this is my building. And then I left. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation, not of a company, but of self-worth. He inherited the company name, but I'd earned every inch of what lay beneath it. And from now on, every step he took in that building was one I'd built myself. The next call didn't come through Camille. It came directly to my cell, late on a Thursday evening. I was on my way home from a board meeting when my phone lit up with Mason's name. I let it ring twice before I answered. Mason, I said. Hey, he replied. His voice sounded different, smaller, the usual confidence that laced his tone, gone. I know it's late, Mason continued, but I didn't want to sit on this. Can we talk? I slowed at a red light. About? There was a pause, a long one. The business, Mason said. I didn't respond right away. He filled the silence himself. I think I messed up, he admitted, more than I realized. I could have said 100 things in that moment. I told you so. You should have listened. You only care now because it's falling apart. But I didn't say any of those things. Instead, I pulled into my driveway and parked in the soft pool of golden light under the garage. Tomorrow, I said, meet me at the cafe on Larch and Pine, 8 a.m. Bring your books. He didn't hesitate. I'll be there. The next morning, he was already seated when I arrived. He stood when I entered, an old habit from Dad. This time, it felt less like posturing and more like respect. Morning, Mason said. Morning, I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. He had a folder with him. Several, actually. Charts, invoices, projections, all spread out and waiting. But before he reached for them, he looked at me with something I hadn't seen from him in years. Vulnerability. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Mason said. The market's changed, costs are up. Our margins are thinning. I expanded too fast, opened 3 locations last year. I thought scale was the answer. Scale is only good if your systems can support it, I replied. Otherwise, it just spreads your failure wider. He chuckled. Yeah, I'm learning that. I tapped the folder. Let me see. He pushed it toward me without hesitation. I skimmed the numbers, the debt ratios, the vendor contracts. It was worse than I'd thought, but not unsalvageable. There was still a recognizable brand, loyal customers, a decent product. But the leadership had been sloppy, and I told him that. "You've been running it like a golden child," I said. "Not a CEO." He blinked. I continued. "Too many assumptions, not enough accountability, and no one to check you. That's how this happened." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "I know," Mason said, "and I want to fix it." I looked at him carefully. "You want my help?" "Yes," he said, "but not just because you own the building or the name or the debt. Because you're good. You were always good. I just didn't see it before." I sat back. Let the words settle. "Okay," I said. "I'll help. But this time it's on my terms." "Which are?" he asked. "Transparency," I said. "No more backroom decisions or surprises." "Fair," Mason nodded. "Equality," I added. "If I'm going to help rebuild this, I'm not your little sister tagging along. I'm your equal, your partner." "Understood," he said quickly. "And one more thing," I said. "No condescension, not in tone, not in words, not even in silence. I've earned this." He met my gaze, and for once, didn't look away. "You have," Mason said, "more than I ever did." There was something in his voice that almost sounded like shame. Not the performative kind, the real one. The kind that comes after years of not listening finally catch up to you. We spent the next hour going through projections, inventory audits, payroll breakdowns. I pointed out redundancies. He listened. I highlighted inefficiencies. He took notes. There were moments when old habits flickered, when his voice lifted slightly in defense or he interrupted without realizing, but I didn't let it slide. Not this time. "Mason," I said at one point, "you asked for help. That means you need to hear it, not just endure it." He stopped, nodded. "You're right. Keep going." By the end of that morning, we had a plan, a real one. I offered access to some of my consultants, helped him renegotiate a vendor contract through one of my other holdings, drafted a new internal structure to split decision-making, and for the first time, I felt the seat beneath me wasn't borrowed. It wasn't given out of pity. It was mine. Earned. Owned. Later that month, we sat side by side in a staff meeting, something that never would have happened before. The employees didn't know exactly what had changed, but they sensed it. The tone. The way he deferred to me on marketing. The way I led the meeting on restructuring. Afterward, one of the managers pulled me aside. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "It feels steadier now." I smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot." And it did. Because this wasn't just about family anymore. This was about vision, about structure, about being taken seriously. Mason didn't always get it right, of course. He still had his blind spots, his moments, but he was trying. And more importantly, he was letting me lead when I needed to. One night, after a particularly long planning session, he poured us both a whiskey in Dad's old office. He handed me mine and said, "You know, I used to think you weren't cut out for business." I arched an eyebrow. "I remember," he smiled. "Turns out you weren't cut out for my version of business." I clinked his glass with mine. "That's the first smart thing you've said all week." We laughed. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And I'd take that, because it meant I didn't just own the building anymore. I was helping rebuild what stood inside it. This time, not from the outside looking in, but from the head of the table, where I'd always belonged. The office looked different now. Not just because of the renovations, though there were many. New furniture, clean branding, fresh paint. The faded motivational posters Dad once loved had been replaced with framed blueprints of the original store. Heritage mattered now. Not nostalgia, but continuity. But what struck me most was the rhythm of the place. There was a new energy to it. a quiet focus that hadn't been there before. Employees moved with clarity. Meetings started on time. People spoke and were heard. It wasn't perfect. Businesses never are, but it was steady, grounded, sustainable. And at the center of it were two names, etched in bronze, on a polished plaque just inside the lobby. Mason Leclerc, CEO Margot Leclerc, Chief Strategy Officer. I ran my fingers over the letters once, after everyone had gone home. The metal was cool, solid, real. My name had never been on the walls growing up. Not in the hallway photos, not in the awards cabinet, not in Dad's ledger. But here it was now. Not in cursive, not in parentheses, not as an afterthought. Equal, permanent. That night, Mason and I sat in the break room with takeout containers and our sleeves rolled up. "You know," Mason said, picking at his noodles, "I used to think being CEO meant always being right." I smirked. "And now?" "Now I know it means being smart enough to ask for help before everything burns down." I raised my container. "A very expensive lesson." He laughed. "Yeah, you should have billed me for the emotional labor." "I still might," I teased. There was silence between us then, but a comfortable one, the kind that only comes after the shouting has stopped and something softer has taken its place. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," Mason said. "I figured," I replied. "The anniversary's coming up." He nodded. "You think he'd be proud?" I glanced around the room, at the small team we'd built, at the work we'd done. "Of the company?" I said. "Maybe. But of us?" "Yes." Mason looked up. I continued. "We didn't just keep the business alive, we changed how it lives. We stopped running it like a family photo and started running it like a legacy." He looked at me, eyes glassy. "You always say the smartest things when I least expect it." "That's because you never listened before," I said gently. He smiled. "You're not wrong." Later that week, we hosted a staff appreciation day. Nothing fancy. Food trucks, outdoor games, little gift bags. But it mattered. For morale, for culture, for all the people who had held on while the company changed hands and direction and tone. I gave a short speech near the end. Just a few words. "Thank you," I said. "Not just for the work you do, but for trusting the new path forward. Mason and I built this place differently, and it only works because of all of you." There was a soft round of applause. No standing ovation, no fireworks. But I didn't need that. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not fighting for a place, not waiting to be noticed, just present, empowered, heard. And Mason? He clapped the loudest. After the event, we lingered in Dad's old office. We'd kept the antique desk, restored it, really, but added new shelving and a digital calendar that now reflected both our schedules. Mason stood at the window, looking out at the city. "Funny," he said. "When we were kids, I thought I had all the answers." "You had most of the spotlight," I said. "That's not the same." He turned toward me. "You ever regret not pushing harder back then? Demanding a role sooner?" I shook my head. I wasn't ready then. But now, I've got everything I need." He nodded slowly. "You really do?" Before we left, he pulled something from his pocket. A small brass key. "I had this made," he said, holding it out. "It's for the new vault, shared access." I took it. Let its weight settle in my palm. "Thank you," I said. "No," Mason replied. "Thank you." Weeks later, we attended a local business conference together. One of the panel moderators introduced us as the brother-sister duo redefining legacy leadership. Mason leaned over and whispered, "You hear that?" "Duo," I whispered back. Took long enough, but I smiled. Because it was true. We were a team now. Not just on paper, not just for PR, but in truth. It hadn't been easy. Growth never is. But we'd earned this. Together. That evening, I walked the quiet halls of the office one last time before heading out. The lights were dimmed, the cleaning crew humming somewhere down the hall. I stopped by the lobby plaque again, read the names, and beneath them, in smaller script, our new company motto, "Legacy isn't what you're given, it's what you build." I stood there for a long time. Then I whispered, "He inherited the business. I built the foundation. And now, we run it together." And for the first time in my life, I truly believed Dad would have been proud of both of us.